This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen, guys. Let me know if you're able to see my screen share.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, good. So, good morning, everyone, once again. So, before I start, welcome to day one class of API testing using Postman. Do you guys have any questions before I start? Okay, cool. So, we'll get started with chapter one today, where we'll discuss what are APIs and the diagrammatical representation of an API to understand it a little better. So I'll be using my Paint application to comment on all these things. So API actually stands for Application Programming Interface. So that is the abbreviation we have for APIs. Now the main question is like we need to understand the definition of it, right? Like what exactly is an API? So I'll write the definition and I'll try to make it clear for you from a diagrammatical example. So when it comes to the definition of an API, I will say an API is an interface or a component developed to enable data communication across multiple modules in an enterprise application. So that is a sweet and simple definition for an API. Now, obviously, for the first time users, it looks little difficult to remember the definition, but it's pretty much easy. Let's try to divide this. Okay, an API is a component, so it's a kind of code written by the developer. And why did he develop it? To enable the data communication, meaning to transfer the data from here to there and from there to here. And where is the data getting communicated or transferred? Between multiple modules. So each module is transferring the data. Like module 1 says I'm sending the data to module 2, module 2 says I'm sending the data to module 3. So, and all these modules are present where in a big software application, which we call it as an enterprise application. So diagrammatically, if you want to feel it, I will say, so let's say this is my, let's say this is one sample application that we are talking about. And inside this, I will take 4 modules. Let's say this is a simple e-commerce application. Let's say it is Amazon.in application. And inside this, let us comment about 4 modules. So I have a login module and I have a logout module. And let's say I have a module for add items to shopping cart. And let's take another module where I say I want to make a payment. So in the Amazon application, I have taken 4 modules to help you guys understand the definition of my APIs. Now, we all know that for me to log out, what is the criteria needed? If I have to log out, don't you think login is necessary? Yes, right? Without login, I cannot log out. So I'll write something here, which I call it as dependency matrix. So I can say that logout module is dependent on login module, right? Similarly, if I want to make a payment in Amazon application, you can also try on the browser if you wish to. For me to make a payment, login is mandatory. Without login, you cannot initiate a payment in Amazon. So I'll say to make a payment, this module depends on login module. Let's say I'm logged in, so I'm able to make a payment. But to make a payment, my shopping cart should have bare minimum one item as quantity, right? If your shopping cart is empty, we cannot make a payment because we don't pay money for charity, right? we buy items and we make payment. So make a payment also depends on add items to shopping cart. So I'll say make a payment also is dependent on add items to shopping cart module. Now if I talk about add items to shopping cart, it does not depend whether I'm logged out. It does not depend whether I'm logged in. It does not depend whether I'm making a payment or not. Add items to shopping cart is an independent module. So add items to shop cart is an independent module. It works whether you are logged in or you are not logged in. It works whether you are logged out or not logged out. It works whether you have money with you or whether you don't have money with you. It's an independent module. So here the first three modules are more dependent actually on each other. So let us put them in red color. So if Kiran wanted to log out in Amazon application, this is what happens. When Kiran clicks on logout button on Amazon or any application, since logout depends on login module, logout will send a command to the login module. The command is like, can I know whether Kiran is still logged in, because he issued a logout command. Because if Kiran is not logged in, how can he log out? Kiran knows that he is logged in, but the software also should know that Kiran is logged in. So therefore, when I click on logout, the code written by the developer sends a function request to login module, and the request is, can I know whether Kiran is logged in or not? So a request is sent. Login module says, well, let me check it in my database, because in the database there will be an entry made whether Kiran is logged in or not, and it will give a response back to the logout module, and the response could be like, yeah, Kiran is still logged in. Then logout module says, well, thank you, and now Kiran will be logged out. So this is something that happens inside every software. Similarly, when I wanted to make a payment, right? First, when Kiran clicks on make a payment button in Amazon mobile app or on the browser, first it will send a request to login, and it says Kiran wanted to make a payment, but I'm doubtful whether he's actually logged in. If he is logged in, is his session still valid or invalid? Login says, okay, let me check my database, and it will give back a response again. Let us assume that the response is yes, this guy is still logged in. So now one dependency is completed. Then make a payment will send one more request to add items to shopping cart. And in this request, it sends, please tell if Kiran has added any items in the shopping cart module. Add items to shopping cart module says, okay, let me check my database and see if Kiran has any items in the shopping cart. And it gives back a response. And let's say the response is he has added 2 items in the shopping cart. Then make a payment will say, okay, my prerequisites are completed, my dependencies are completed. Let me now go and start the payment gateway initiation process. So this is what happens inside any enterprise application whenever the user is interacting with it. Okay, so now you see the modules are sending a request and getting responses, meaning each module is communicating with another module. To communicate, it is sending a request and receiving a response. This process of sending a request and receiving a response, we call it as data communication. So that is what I wrote in my definition here. So you see here, APIs are developed to enable data communication. So login and logout are doing data communication by sending a request and a response. Make a payment and login are doing data communication by sending a request and response. Make a payment and add items to shopping cart is doing a request and a response by sending a request and receiving a response. So they are involved in data communication. But how are they able to send a request and how are they able to receive a response? What is the technology the developers are using to have this data communication enabled? The answer is API, application programming interface. So they are using a technology called API to send this request and to get this response. Now you come back to my definition and read it again. An API is a component which is developed to enable data communication, and the data communication is sending a request and response across multiple modules, meaning multiple modules are doing this request and response. in an enterprise application. Where are these modules present? Inside this big green color box, which is nothing but my Amazon enterprise application. So this is how you understand this definition using this diagram. Any questions, guys, now to in understanding what is an API? Any questions? Yes, no? Please unmute and let me know. Okay, all of you are on mute.
Can you hear me, Kiran?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good from my side.
Okay, good, nice. Okay, so we understood the definition of an API. Now this is the simplest definition you can keep in your mind. That's the purpose of APIs. Let's dive a little deeper here. Now we said that the logout is sending a request and login is giving a response. But how does this request goes and how does this response comes? Of course using APIs, but in which format? Like I'm teaching you API testing, but in which language am I teaching you? English, right? Because we agreed that English is a better way for me to communicate with you and for you to communicate with me. So what is the data description format that login and logout are using to communicate with each other? That is the next thing that we have to answer. So I'll write it here. APIs uses below data descriptive languages to communicate data transfer. Okay, or I'll say while doing data transfer. So all we say is okay, logout and login are talking to each other using APIs, but in which language are they talking to each other? Do they speak in Hindi, do they speak in English, or some other language? So the answer is there are different technologies available and it's up to the developer to decide which data communication language they use in their project. But the options available is they can use text format, they can communicate in HTML format, they can communicate in XML format, they can communicate in JSON format, or they can communicate in YAML format. So these are the different formats available for developers to use in their APIs. So text HTML are outdated. So this is outdated technology today. HTML is also outdated technology. Now don't take me wrong when I say HTML is outdated. HTML is used for designing web pages. That is different. I'm talking about APIs using HTML to transfer the data. That process is outdated. XML, I would say it is 90% outdated, if not 100%. So this is 90% outdated technology today, XML. But 10% people are still using it. Now coming to JSON, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It is one of the formats developers use to send the data from one module to another format, and it is being used 100%. Today, this is the technology that APIs are using. YAML is another new one. It is being used, but not at 100%. Some X percentage is what people are using it. It is not outdated. Again, it is not being used 100%. But today, 99% of the developers, they recommend JSON as the data communication language to be used while designing their APIs or while developing the APIs. We will talk about XML, JSON in the different diagram. I'll explain about that. But these are the data descriptive languages that APIs uses to communicate from one module to another module. Okay. So in the interviews, the common question is like, so are you using JSON or XML in your APIs? So the meaning of this question is like, what descriptive language your APIs are using to transfer the data from here to there and from there to here. So most of the times the answer will be JSON, unless you are working on a very old technology of APIs which is still using XML. Now, how does an XML look like? What is an XML first of all? Right. So to talk about that, I'll write here. So we'll start with HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And the syntax of a HTML when written by a developer, it looks like this. It starts with a tag called HTML and it ends with a tag called HTML. So when it is ending, you will see one forward slash, and in between you will have a lot of things, like I can have a body. Every tag you open should be closed like this. Then let's say I wanted to send a paragraph, P1 paragraph, or heading H1 I want to send, and everything you start should be ended. And the message I want to send is, we are in API testing class. So this message I can send it in WhatsApp to you, like the class has started. So I'll say like this: the class has started, please join the bridge. So this is the WhatsApp message you see. But if WhatsApp is using HTML format, it will go like this: from my computer to your computer, or from my phone to your phone, from my WhatsApp to your WhatsApp. It will go like this. So this kind of syntaxes HTML will use and your developers will use. Okay? But this process, like I said, no developer is using this methodology of transferring the data in APIs. The next technology that the industry came up with is XML. So if you're using XML, XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. It also uses the syntax something similar to what HTML does, but it will use the word XML there. So again, I have to close the tag XML. And let's say I wanted to send a message. Then you have something like envelope, which is another syntax that the developers use. This is not necessary for testers. I'm only writing for example purpose. And let's say I wanted to send a message. So you'll have a message tag. And whatever message I want to send, I can put it there. So I'll just put the same message: the class has started, please join the bridge. So if I'm sending in XML format, this is how it looks like. This is a very simple syntax I'm writing. The syntax can become complex as well. Any questions, guys, until this point?
So we don't use this, right? I mean, we don't basically use this syntax to build the automation, right? It's gonna be JavaScript, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So this is like we have to understand the syntax, right? At least like.
One second. Yeah, yeah, I'm answering your question now. So when we are testing the APIs using Postman tool, we use JavaScripts. That is for testing purpose. For automation testing of APIs, we use JavaScript in the Postman tool. And what I'm writing right now is, when the APIs are developed by the developer, and when you are sending some data from one module to another module, the developer may say that use this syntax to transfer the data, or use this syntax to transfer the data. So he can use either XML or HTML or JSON. But like I said, 99% of the times we use JSON only. JSON for sending the data, XML for sending the data, HTML for sending the data. For automation testing of the developed APIs, we use JavaScripts. Now you got the confusion clear?
Yeah, understood. So if we
Yeah.
perform any manual, then we use this, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Understood.
Okay, now then we have JSON. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Whatever I'm writing now, this is for the developer to do. You will not do it as a tester, but we need to know the basic things. So we are just writing at a very high level. So JSON is also a way for us to send the data from one place to another place. Okay. So the syntax of JSON is pretty simple. Uh, it follows key value pair structure. So what is key value pair structure? Simple. So JSON starts with a flower bracket, ends with a flower bracket, and here you will have a key in double quotations, colon, and a value. And if you wanted to have one more key and a one more value, you will write a comma and you will paste it. Like that, you will continue until you stop it. So let's say I don't want any further, then I'll remove the comma at the end. So this is a simple syntax of a JSON. I'll give an example of it now. So key can be anything, like I will say trainer name, and the value is Kiran. So I wanted to tell you, like Santosh is asking, hey, what is your name? So I'm saying my name is Kiran. So if I'm sending the data through JSON format, I can say here trainer name and the value is Kiran, comma, and I wanted to tell you something else, like you commented what is your experience levels, like you asked me what is your experience. I'll say 18 years is my experience, comma, and one of you asked like what tool are you using in this class, then I will say, hey, I'm using Postman tool. So I'll put that like this here. So this tool name can be anything. You write ABCD also. Something meaningful is what you have to write. So this is one example of a JSON structure, how it looks like. So whenever you see this key and value pair, you should be able to tell immediately that, hey, this looks like a JSON. And when you see this orange color syntax, you should be able to say, hey, this is XML because I see the word XML. And when you see this kind of syntax, you should say that, yeah, this is in HTML format because you see HTML. But for JSON, you don't see anywhere JSON word. You will see only this key and value in parentheses or in flower brackets. That's how you have to differentiate between HTML versus XML versus JSON. And developer uses these three ways to send the data. Now, if you're still confused, like what is this HTML, what is this XML, what is this JSON, I'll repeat it again. They are data transfer ways to transfer the data from one module to another module. These are the ways to transfer the data. Okay, I'll take one simple example. Let us say Kiran is here. I'm at a location called A, and I'll take one more person. Let's say Divya. So Divya is at another location B. Now Kiran has to transfer some parcel item to Divya. Okay, maybe some parcel has to be sent by Kiran to Divya. So what is the objective? Send a parcel, right? But I'm so busy in my office that I cannot travel to Divya's place and hand it over. Divya is also busy in her office, so she cannot come and take the parcel. So I need to find a way to send this parcel. So what are the ways for me to transfer it? Like Rapido, I can book, right? I can book a Rapido bike, and I tell that guy that, hey, send this parcel by coming to location A and handing it over to location B. So if I use Rapido service, they help me in couriering this parcel from one place to another place. Let's say this Rapido person says, I will charge 500 rupees. And I'm like, wow, this is too high because the difference of, I mean, the distance is pretty much 20 kilometers only. So 500 rupees is pretty high. So I'll go for some other guy. Let's say I'll go for Uber bike. And I'll ask the same thing here. Hey, I'll ask him the same question. You have to send this parcel. So this guy says it comes at 500 rupees. and this guy says this service comes at 350 rupees. Then let's say I'll talk about another service called Ola Bike, and this guy says this service comes at 415 rupees. The objective is the same, but I will obviously prefer this one because it is cheaper, right? I would like to save money, so I'll go for this. So Rapido Bike is like HTML way of sending the data. Uber Bike is like JSON way of sending the data. Ola Bike is like sending XML way of data. Now, Divya can question me, Kiran, why did you go for Uber? Why can't you go for Ola? My answer is Uber is cheaper, Divya, so I'm going for it. Divya is like, okay, fine. So you can question the developer, why are you using JSON? Why not HTML? Why not XML? Developer says, Kiran, HTML and XML are outdated. So why should we use the old technology to develop APIs and send data in the software? So they use JSON today. Okay. So what is HTML, XML, JSON? A way for you to transfer the data from one module to another module. And this is the syntaxes the developers uses to transfer the data. Now, is it clear, guys, on what is data descriptive languages, syntaxes, and the purpose? If you have questions, confusions, ask me. Okay, so is it clear, guys, on what is this? Okay, so now we'll talk about the client and server architecture, which is the next thing. So let me change the diagram. So I'll say this is my client. This is my server. In API testing, the client and server architecture plays a very, very important role. And this diagram is like the bread and butter while doing your API testing. So I'm going to explain quickly what is this client and server architecture. Now we all know what is a client, right? It is any device from where you submit a request. So client job is to send a request. Examples of client is we use browser on a daily basis to submit request, right? We use browser to type gmail.com, google.com, etc., etc. And the tool we are learning is Postman in this course. Postman is also a client software using which we submit API request. And when it comes to server, we know that server receives the client request and submits a response back to the client. So examples of server is Tomcat server, Microsoft IIS server, Nginx server, WebSphere, Glassfish. They're all examples of servers, application servers. If you want hardware servers, we have AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, Control S. Lot of hardware servers are also there in the market, which provide services for server. So we know that client sends a request to the server. So client is sending a request, and the job of server is to receive the request, process it, and give back a response to the client. So let us write down here now that this client is sending an API request, and this server is giving me an API response. So let us see some examples of some requests and some responses on the browser. So when I type something like, let's say, google.com, that is a request we submitted on the browser. So this is a request. And did we get a response? Yes, whatever interface you see, that is a response. And we know that every website provides the response in HTML format. So I'll type here, HTML is the response we got. If you need a proof, you can right click and click on this page source. And you can see here the response is in HTML format. You see the word HTML is here. Every website gives the response in HTML format. So this is one example of a request and one example of a response. Let us change the request now. So I'll type something else, plugins.catalan.com. That's another request I have in my mind. I'm typing it. And let us see whether we have got a response or not. Yeah, so this is the request we submitted on the client, which is browser. And did we get a response? Yes, we got some response, but it is an error. And it is in which format? XML format. So this is following some basic XML standard. So we got response in XML format. So here you see I have taken two different examples, and two different examples are giving two different responses, sometimes in HTML, sometimes in XML. Let us change the example. So I'll type some other request which I have in my mind. And so this is the request I'm sending. And did we get a response? Yes. And if you see, it is following the key and value pair. Author is the key, yours truly is the value. Date is the key, date of publication is the value. So this is following a JSON response format. So that's an example of JSON. So what I would like to conclude here is, when you are testing the APIs, when the client and server architecture is involved, you get responses sometimes in HTML, sometimes in XML, sometimes in JSON format. So the developer decides whether he wanted to give the response in HTML or XML or in JSON format. So that is the first thing we see in request and response under client and server architecture. The second thing that we also have is protocol. We all have seen so many protocols in our colleges, I mean in college days and in your projects also. Protocol is used to transfer the data from client to server and server to client. And there are so many protocols that we have in the internet, right? So example, if you look at this request only, the protocol I'm using is HTTPS. So HTTPS is one of the very common standard protocol that we use these days. So in API testing, we use two protocols. Either HTTP protocol we use or HTTPS we use. HTTPS is the latest protocol, which is a secured protocol, meaning your data is guaranteed from client to server and server to client. And you have a very old protocol called HTTP, where your data is not guaranteed, meaning your data can be lost if you are using the old protocol HTTP. Again, that's an interview question. Difference between HTTP and HTTPS. HTTP is an unsecured way of sending the data from client to server and from server to client, whereas HTTPS is a secured way of sending the data from server to client or client to server. The difference is, in HTTP protocol, the data can be lost in between because a hacker can steal the data. Whereas in HTTPS, the data cannot be lost, the data cannot be damaged. The data will be sent definitely 100% from client to server and server to client. Therefore, hackers cannot hack your HTTPS protocol. So in client and server architecture, while doing APIs, remember that we use one of these two protocols, and the protocol recommended is always HTTPS by the industry. Then we have HTTP methods, right?
So this is all when we use only HTML, right? Sorry, sir.
No, this is in general. This
In
has
general,
nothing to
okay.
do with this has nothing to do with your APIs, JSON or XML or HTML. Okay. So coming to HTTP methods, which means whenever a client is sending a request, every request is associated with a HTTP method. So there are HTTP methods such as get method, post method, put method, patch method, delete method. So have you guys heard of these methods in your projects, in your offices?
Uh,
Okay, look.
yes, from my side, a little bit.
Okay, so let me take some time to explain it. So in API testing, we use these methods a lot, but we need to know the definition or the purpose of these methods. So get, post, put, patch, delete, very simple ones only. So the developer will ask you to use the method as get in your APIs when the requirement is to read existing data from the server or from the database. The developer will ask you to use post method when the requirement is to create new data in the server or in the database. And the developer will ask you to use put method when the requirement is to update existing data in the server or in the database. And the developer will ask you to use patch method for the same reason, update. And the developer will ask you to use a delete method to delete existing data in the server or in the database. So uh, examples when we will use get method is when you are a file download functionality will use get method. Now when will you download a file? When the file exists. See, you are doing an action on an existing data. So to download a file, the file should exist first. If the file is existing, you are downloading it. So downloading a file from the internet is always a get call. Okay. Or browsing a web page. You go to amazon.in, flipkart.com, and you browse what are the products available, what are the deals and discounts available. So you are reading it because the data already exists on the website. So browsing any web page is also a get call. Or reading old messages or reading old emails, it is also a get call, because you are dealing with an action and that action is working on existing data in your inbox or on your WhatsApp. So they all are using get call in the programming code. Examples where we use post method is file upload. If you're uploading a file, you are creating a file on the server, which is nothing but you are creating data on the server. So file upload is always a post method. Then user sign up to any website, like you sign up to Instagram page or Facebook. When you sign up, you are creating your data on the database. So that is also creating process. So it is a post call. Okay. Sending emails or messages, you are creating content there, right? You are sending a comment, you are sending a message, you are sending an email, which means you are creating content on the internet. So they are all examples of post method. Coming to put and patch, examples are change password. So when you change a password, you are modifying or updating existing password to a new password. So that is an example of put method. Or profile picture updates. So on the WhatsApp, everyone has a profile picture, and we change it. Sometimes whenever you feel you have a better profile picture. So there you are updating the profile picture. So that is an example of put method. Or profile updates that you do on Facebook or social media. They're also examples of put method. Same examples applicable for patch also. Finally, for delete method, deleting emails or messages on WhatsApp or Gmail. They're all examples of delete methods. Or deactivating social media accounts. They're all examples of delete methods. So these are the 5 HTTP methods that the developer will ask us to use it in the project. So we use get method for reading existing data. We use post method for creating new data. We use put method for update. We use patch method for updating old data. We use delete method for deleting the data. We call all these as CRUD operations. Interview question again. So they say, do you do CRUD operations? So I'm writing CRUD vertically. C means create, R means read, U means update, D means delete. So to create, what method do I use? Post method. To read the data, what method I use? Post method. To update, what method I use? Put or patch. To delete, what method I use? Delete method. This is what they mean in the interviews when they say CRUD operations testing. Okay, so am I clear, guys, on the HTTP methods?
What is the difference between put and patch? I mean, it sounds similar, but
Yeah, they are similar, but there is a difference also. Patch is used for partial updates. You cannot update all the fields in the database with patch method, but you can update all the fields in the database using put method. That's the difference. Patch is for selective updates only. Like you can update 2 fields, 3 fields, but not all the 10 fields. And patch is little outdated now. Developers may not use it. Mostly they use put method only. Whether the requirement is to update all the fields in the database or only few fields in the database.
Okay.
Okay. Then in the client and server architecture, while doing APIs, you also encounter something called request headers. We need to test these request headers also in API testing. Now coming to what are request headers, I'll explain more all these things while practically teaching Postman tool, because right now if I go more theory, I think too much theory also causes a lot of disturbance. That's why I'm going at a very high level. But once I switch to Postman tool in the next week, you'll understand more. Coming to request headers, they send additional data to the server along with client request. So here, what is the client request? Either google.com is request, or this is a request, or this catalan.com is another request. So along with this request, we send some additional data as part of request headers. So what can be those additional data? Example, I'll say authorization. So to log in into Google, what is that I have to send? A username and a password, which is the authorization. So authorization is one of the request header where the credentials of the user will be supplied. Then cookies. Let's say to log in, my browser is using some cookies. So these cookies also should go to the server. So cookies will be part of your request headers. You do not know that you are sending a cookie, but the browser will send a cookie. So that additional data, what the browser is sending to the server, we call it as request headers. So like this, there are so many request headers. So we have another request header called connection. So connection will tell whether client and server are connected with each other or not, which means whether the browser is connected to the server or still disconnected with the server. Then we have another one which is called user agent. User agent will tell which browser I'm using, what is the browser version I'm using, and what is the operating system I'm using when sending a request. So server knows from which browser you are sending, what version of the browser you are using, and what operating system you are using. So whenever you type yahoo.com or google.com or anything on the browser you type, server will definitely know from which infrastructure you are sending the request. And that information is passed by this header called user agent. So request headers provides lot of details to the server. I just gave 4 examples. Like this, there are 50 examples of request headers where the browsers are sending lot of data about your request to the server. So we have connection header, user agent header, cookies header, authorization header, etc. Like this, I said, too many headers are there. Again,
Can you repeat the same thing again? Like why? Uh, I mean the previous sentence. I didn't catch that.
which one you mean? User
When
agent?
when we use this header, sorry.
Okay, it's not about when we use it. When you
Okay.
send a request using Postman tool, or when you send a request on the browser,
Okay.
the browser will send additional details about the request like this, like authorization details, cookies, connection, user
Okay.
agent, lot of other details browser will send.
Okay.
Okay, because the server wanted to know lot of additional information about the request, otherwise server will never give a response. Okay. So these are few of the request headers client will send. Now let us see what server is sending to client. So server also will send something like response headers similar to request headers, but these response headers will provide additional information coming from server to the client. So request headers is going from client to server, right? So these things go from client to server. Now, if I talk about response headers, these details come from server to client. So server is providing additional details here to the client, that along with response body, I'm giving you some more details. So that some more details could be a date, the date on which the response is coming. Server name also will be displayed in the response headers, whether Tomcat server is responding or Apache, or Nginx server is responding or Microsoft IIS server is responding. And if server is sending new cookies, you will see new cookies coming. And if server wants to disconnect the connection with the client with the browser, it will send one more connection header, etc. Like that, there are different response headers that server will send to the client. Okay, something like this. Let's say, Santosh, you go to a bank and you ask the bank manager, I need a loan, home loan for 1 crore. And the bank manager says, sorry, Santosh, your loan is rejected. So that is the response. But Santosh will not walk away. He will say, why? Now the bank manager will give you reasons why the loan is rejected. That is the additional information that bank manager is giving it to you. So that is nothing but response headers. Response is loan is rejected and you're questioning why. So he will give you reasons. So reason one is your salary is not sufficient to repay 1 crore loan. Your pay slips are only for the last 3 months, but we need for last 6 months. And you are working for a small company which is not whitelisted by the bank. You don't have any savings, so we cannot give you 100% loan. You already have some personal loans and vehicle loan, so you're not entitled for this 1 crore home loan. So he's giving you different reasons, different pointers why their loan is rejected. They're all response headers. So that additional information, whether client is giving or server is giving, we call them as headers. Okay. Then we have finally a response code, and every response code will have a response description. So whenever client sends a request, server will give a response code to the client, and that code has a meaning. So I'll tell here what is response code. It is a 3-digit status code that reveals status of client request. So when you send a request, you expect a response, right? The response can be that your request failed, your request succeeded, or your request is redirected from server 1 to server 2, or server 2 to server 3, or your request is still getting processed. So some meaning has to be there, some response has to be there for the request you sent out. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? So whenever the server sends a response to the client, the response can be somewhere between 100 to 599. This is the response code range that server can send to client. So during API testing, you will see a response code from this to this. Any response code you will get. Okay, any response code you will get, but we need to understand the meaning of these response codes. So what API testing says is divide them into families like this: 100 to 199, 200 to 299, 300 to 399, 400 to 499, 500 to 599. So this is how I can divide these range into 5 classes, and we call it as 1xx series, we call it as 2xx series, we call it as 3xx series, 4xx and 5xx. Now what is 1xx? 1xx means informational response. 2xx means successful response. 3xx means redirectional response. 4xx means client side error. 5xx means server side error. So when the client sends a request, server will give one of these response codes back to the client. And the response code, if it falls between 200 to 299, you can simply assume that we got a success response from the server. If the response is falling between 400 to 499, it is an error, and the error is coming from the client, not from the server. If the response code from server is falling between 500 to 599, it is also an error, but this error is coming from the server, not from the client. If the response is falling between 300 to 399, it is a redirection, meaning the server which received the request is busy, so it redirected the request to another server which is free. So the another server is giving a response. That is called redirection. And informational response means your request is still being processed. It is in the waiting list. It is in the queue process. You have not yet received any response. So what we have to understand here is, I'll give some common examples of 200 codes. We have a common code called 200, which means OK. 201 means successfully created. 202 means successfully accepted. 204 means no content. You get this response code when you are using a get method on the API. When you are using a post method, and if the data is successfully created in the database, you get the response code as 201 created. And if you are using a put or a patch method, and if it is successfully updating the data in the database, this is the response code you will get. And if you are using a delete method, delete API, to delete the data, if it is successfully deleting the data, you get this method, this response code from the server. So these are 4 important response codes that we will see while doing API testing in your projects. Coming to client side errors or server side errors. Server side errors, we have 500, which means internal server error, which means server is temporarily unable to handle the request. Then you have 503, which is service unavailable, meaning server is currently not available for any person in the world. Server is either shut down, or no internet, or no power supply, or server is restarting, or server is going through some software updates, hardware updates. During those process, when you send a request to the server, server will send this response code that I am unavailable. It is like your phone is switched off. Internal server error is like I'm talking to someone else on the phone, but you are calling me now. You get a busy tone. That is like internal server error. Then another response codes on 400 series is 400 means bad syntax. 401 means unauthorized. 403 means forbidden. 404 means not found. These are few of the common errors we get while doing API testing. 400 bad syntax means the data that you entered is invalid. Invalid data entered in the application. Invalid or missing data entered. Something like, you think of, let me show you one small example. So I'll say Instagram sign up. So here, let's say I'm entering some email, tiger@lion.com, and I'm entering the tiger name, username, but I'm not entering the password. Okay. When I click on sign up, you will get an error, right? Right now, this application is not giving an error. What does it say when you click on sign up? Please enter the password, because it is missing, right? So when you don't enter one of the fields, or when the data entered is incorrect, right? Example, here I'm entering ABCD. This is neither a mobile number nor an email. So you see this error here, right? So this errors is nothing but 400 bad syntax when the invalid data is entered. Then 401 unauthorized, when you entered invalid credentials, then you get this 401 unauthorized error. Example, when I go to login and I type here lion@tiger.com and some password lion, you click on login, you got some error. Sorry, your password is not correct. Please double check your password. So this error is nothing but invalid credentials, invalid credentials, 401 unauthorized. Then you have 403 forbidden. This error comes when you don't have access rights to do something. Like, can I delete this user account lion@tiger.com in Instagram database? I cannot, because I don't have permissions. But when I'm trying to delete it by clicking on a delete button, I get a message that you don't have permissions to do this activity. So whenever you see that error message, you don't have the rights to do this activity. You are not the owner. You don't have access rights. That error, we call it as 403 forbidden. And 404 not found will come when the page or the user you are trying to access is not found on the server. So if I go to instagram.com or if I go to google.com, see, it is working. But if I type google.com/divya.html, do we have a page called divya.html on google.com? No. See, when I press enter, I'm getting 404 error. And it says the requested URL divya.html is not found. What is this 404? I wrote here, not found, which is divya.html is not found. So this is the error you get. So these are few of the common response codes that we have to keep in mind while doing the testing. So under response codes, we have 1xx, 2xx, 3xx, 4xx, 5xx. 5xx means it's a server side error. 4xx means it's a client side error. 3xx means it's a redirectional response. 2xx means it's a successful response. 1xx means it's an informational response. Okay, so these are the response codes and these are the response descriptions that we have in the client and server architecture while we are doing API testing. So this is something that we have to keep in mind throughout the course while doing API testing. If this class is missed or we didn't understand this class, then probably while doing Postman automation testing, we will get some hiccups here and there, little difficulty we will have. But I'll repeat these things again and again while I'm doing practicals using Postman tool in the upcoming classes. So that's all I have for today's class, guys. The next class will be on Monday. Weekends we do not have classes, and Monday onwards we are going to have the paid classes. So if you have not yet discussed with Isha team, please go back and communicate with Isha team about your interest levels and complete the processing payments. From Monday onwards, the link shall change and the timing still remains the same. We'll continue the classes from Monday onwards. Now, before we sign off from today's class, Santosh, Divya, and SK, do you have any questions?
Can you go back to the screen again? Just want to check.
Okay, the diagram.
Yes.
Yeah. Any question that you have there?
Think. So you mentioned like on the servers, like Tomcat. These all are the server names, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just trying to see if I'm missing. Yeah, I think I'm good.
Yeah, and do not worry about the notes. I mean, next week onwards, I'll start sharing all the notes with you guys on a daily basis. Soon after the class is completed, in the next 5 minutes, the notes will be available to you guys, and the videos also will be available. But maybe after 3 hours of the class is completed, the video will be shared with you guys, so that if you want to re-listen to the class one more time, you can do that.
Okay.
Cool. So thank you for joining these demonstration classes, guys. From Monday onward, the actual classes will come in. So please reach out to Isha team if you have any questions. Thank you very much, and you guys have a good weekend. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.